We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to pick the laws. We enforce them. But at the end of the day, each and every member is to go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. I'm your host, Dave Bourne, and it is Wednesday, February 4th, 2015. I can't really hear myself that good coming through. Oh, there we go. If I turn up my headphones, just want to make sure the sound is coming through okay. It actually sounds pretty good tonight. I believe I have perfected my audio finally. I wish I had like an applause track or whatever. So as I've been talking about the past few weeks, I got some pretty good equipment. I'm recording everything now on a Zoom H4n and uploading that now to Blog Talk Radio as opposed to the archives being generated via Blog Talk Radio, because one of the biggest complaints was the sound quality, although that just seemed to come from other people that have their own shows that have better sound quality. But yeah, it's a legitimate point, and I've been wanting to improve the audio. So at least now for the archives, I've gotten to that point, and then I'm going to look into other ways to broadcast live and to get a listen line. So I'm still, I guess, progressing to improving everything with the show. Hopefully the content and my personal whatever announcing or whatever as well. So thank you for tuning in to Nonpartisan Liberty for All Radio. We're on weeknights, 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern, and promote the ideas of true freedom and liberty, meaning having the freedom to do what you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and allow them to be free and not directly interfering with their freedom, as well as exposing government for what it is, a mafia gang that rules without consent by threat of force. I did say one day with consent by mistake, and I think that was the day I had Rich Paul on last week. Of course, if you missed that show, or if you miss any of the shows, you can check out the archives at blogtalkradio.com/nonpartisan liberty for all, or on iTunes. I think maybe it's been 2 weeks now that the new audio has been uploaded. Although a couple of shows there, as I mentioned, I'm still trying to perfect it, getting all my settings nice. I did some testing over the weekend. I thought yesterday's show came out pretty good for the most part, but there were some points in the show where my audio was not, the levels were not where I wanted them to be. But again, it's a work in progress. We have a good show for you tonight, or great show, or great guest, because I don't know, show may suck. But we have a great guest for you tonight. Liberty activist, former Free Talk Live co-host, host of, I don't know if I should still say host of Pork Therapy, but technically it's on hiatus, so we'll say that. Host of Let's Talk Bitcoin, voiceover activist, Dr. Stephanie Murphy. She's actually a doctor. She has a PhD in, I have to ask her again. I have it written down, biochemistry. So I want to ask her about that. She's very intelligent, very busy with all these different things going on. So we're happy to have her on the show. Stephanie, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Dave. Thanks so much for having me on.
So there's a lot of things that I want to ask you about. You have a lot of things going on. There's plenty of interviews of Stephanie on YouTube, or at least not even interviews, but just a lot of the different media things that you've done. One of the things I didn't know, but I noticed by your voice that you narrated was the 101 Reasons to Move to New Hampshire that you did recently. That was you doing the voiceover on that, right?
Yeah, it was. And I actually did move to New Hampshire in 2006. So I'm a pretty early mover to the Free State Project. Of course, that was why I moved.
Right. So you said that before. I actually could have brought that up because I knew that. So I could have shown how I even know that you moved in 2006 and you first heard about them, I believe, in 2002. See, I do my research.
You know, Dave, I have to say you are very perceptive. You really pick up on a lot, and
Oh, thank you.
I'm very impressed by the information gathering that you did about me,
Yes.
including the fact that admittedly I can be a little scattered and a little busy because I've got a lot of different projects going on, and I've been sort of trying to figure out what direction I really want to focus on in the last couple of years. But I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yeah, and I mean that's a great thing in a way. I mean you're doing so many different things and trying to contribute to the liberty movement, and of course trying to make a living at the same time. So that's always nice to do as well. But so
Not
yeah,
always those two things don't always align.
yeah, unfortunately, I mean even with doing the show, and I haven't been doing it that long. It's been I think 9 months now, but I'm paying for it and not making money off it. But right now, I'm not really actively trying to do that neither. But I have a full-time job that pays me, all right. So I'm good for now. But yeah, it's definitely harder to, I think, make money. I don't want to call it a genre. I don't want to call liberty media a genre, I guess. But whatever you want to call it, that it doesn't seem to be able to generate the same amount of money, whether it's because a lot of people are doing it part-time, or the other thing is the support, where the commercial support that you get for all of these other media projects that Republicans and Democrats and whatever, that they don't seem to support liberty media, because I think for a lot of them it's against their own interest, I guess.
Yeah, it's I would say it's like a niche rather than a genre. And I think you're right though. It can be just hard to make a living out of it, but that's not the reason that everybody who is in the liberty media does it. A lot of people just do it for sort of the psychological reward or payoff that they get from getting to be part of a community or making connections or being listened to and heard, being considered an authority or not an authority, but like just an expert, I guess
Right.
you could say. So there's lots of reasons that people join the media. And then you have the phenomenon where liberty loving people are more likely to sort of put themselves out there and to want to be like thought leaders. I think they tend to be analytical and deep thinkers, and they want to share their thoughts with the world. So it just leads to this kind of constellation of there being lots of people who are maybe would consider themselves liberty lovers who end up becoming the media. Oh yeah, they also like the thing about the no gatekeepers now, because
Right.
now everybody can just start a blog or a podcast. It's the barrier to entry is so low, so almost anyone can do it, and they do.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm doing, and that's exactly the reason why I do it for, meaning that I had no intention of ever making any money. If that's something that happens in the future, that's great. I think I still have a lot to work on and improve on. But yeah, I mean, if that's something that happens, that's great. If not, I'm perfectly fine doing what I'm doing just as a form of activism. And that's really what it is. Of course.
Yeah, man. Good for you. I can really relate to that, actually, because back in 2009, when I started my first podcast, Pork Therapy, it was as a hobby. It was just a fun thing. Like my friend and I were basically sitting around and saying, oh, I love like Dan Savage's podcast and his advice column. Wouldn't it be cool if we did like some kind of a advice, like a relationship advice show, but from a liberty perspective? And so we just started doing it. And at the time, I had no idea. I was working in science. I was working on my PhD. But it turned into more than just a hobby over the next 5 years. And eventually I ended up making a career change. And now I work full time in audio production and voiceover.
Now you're getting ahead of me.
Okay.
No, it's okay. But before that, to actually take a step back, when you were growing up, and I always ask everybody about this because everybody has a different way, I guess, that they found the ideas of liberty, because it's something that you're not going to learn in government schools, or usually your friends aren't going to be talking about it when you're a kid, or your parents, or things like that. Of course, there's always exceptions to that. But I guess the way that you first came across the ideas of liberty was through looking at religion and atheism.
Yeah, definitely. I started to realize at a very young age. So I was brought up Jewish, And it was actually kind of a conflict for my parents because my dad wasn't Jewish, my mother was, and she basically was just trying to please the old people in the family, you know, like the grandparents who
Yeah.
wanted me to be Jewish as this sort of like consolation prize because
That's
my dad wasn't Jewish.
that's
And, you know, there's
exactly, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but that's exactly what my father's mother, as my father's Jewish and my mother's Catholic, but neither of them were really practicing growing up. But yeah, it was my grandmother tried to push that down all the grandchildren's throats, although none of them really gave a fuck and didn't do anything. Never went to
Yeah.
temple or anything like that. So, but sorry, go ahead.
Oh, well, I'm glad you guys got spared from it more than I did, but I was made to go to Hebrew school and like I just felt from a pretty young age that like something wasn't right about it. You know, not only was the fact, of course, the big obvious thing was that my dad wasn't participating in it, right? So it was like, well, clearly, if he doesn't have to do this, maybe it's not right or it's not the only way or whatever. But then I don't know. I just remember being surrounded in these religious buildings and like surrounded by Jews, and they're all like they seem to be like having these religious experiences or whatever. And in some cases, it was quite like grandiose. Like they wanted people to know about it. You know, they wanted people to know that they were just communing with God or whatever. And I always thought there was something wrong with me because I never experienced anything like that. But then at some point, I realized that they actually weren't experiencing it either. They were just all faking it. And when I realized that, I sort of had this awakening, or I realized that, hey, this is all pretend. And at the time, it was in the 90s and the internet was kind of new. And I'd just gotten not AOL, but like I had some kind of a dial-up connection, a 28K modem. And I started like looking on the internet for stuff that would support these new kinds of conclusions that I was coming to about religion and questioning it. And I found some atheist websites and those were pretty cool. And then I also found like somehow those were linked or those led me to some libertarian websites. I actually remember the first libertarian website I ever looked at was like the Libertarian Party, the National LP of America. And I remember reading like their political platform, and I didn't quite get the idea that like, hey, if they're participating in the political system, maybe they're not as libertarian as they say they are. But it was just, I had never seen
Yeah,
anything like it before. And I was reading their political planks and I was like, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, that sounds good to me. So I was like, oh, libertarian. And that's how I found out about the word. And then it just kind of spiraled from there.
yeah, I never got that where based on, I guess, the true definition of libertarian, which I have no idea really what it is at this point because you have conservatives saying they're libertarians. But how can you actually be part of a party and then, you know, be for these ideas? It really, it doesn't make sense. I guess what it's morphed into being a party that just wants a limited government, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it really, based on I guess what the true definition is, which again I'm still kind of confused to that, but it doesn't sound like it's something that should have a political party or be part of government. It should be part of ending a government from the
I
outside.
think they're just yeah, totally. I'm totally with you. I mean, I think they're just people who are kind of confused because I was confused too at the beginning, right? Like I remember at the time when I found that website, I think I was in school and there was a class that I was taking called government class.
Were you
And it was
still
like,
in? Sorry to interrupt. Were you still in high school at that time, or how
yeah,
old
it
were you?
was high school or before. It was actually before high school that I started.
Okay, so you were
finding
pretty
this stuff.
young when you started to get into these ideas.
Yeah, it was pretty young. I mean, I really started to question religion around age 12 or something like that. And then over the next few years, I was doing research on the internet. And it took a while after that for it to click because, oh man, there's so much more to like the whole evolution of how I really got to where I am today. But I was just going to say, like, you get so many messages from culture that there's no way you could not have a government. You know what I mean? It's like there's nothing in culture that tells you that people can manage their own behavior. Like, everything's telling you someone else has to be telling you what to do. Someone else has to be ruling over you. And that's like the natural way of things. But of course, it's not natural because, in nature, everything is, there aren't rulers and ruled. There are just animals that interact with each other. And, even the countries in the world that have governments, they're in a state of anarchism with respect to one another, right? There's no world overarching government. And so how does that happen, right? And so, yeah, nobody ever points that stuff out to you. And I had to kind of like painfully reach those conclusions on my own. I guess when I got a little older, I got to college, and somehow, I don't remember how, but somehow I found out about LouRockwell.com, which is a popular libertarian blog, and they have articles all the time. They've got like new articles every day. And at the time, in like the early 2000s, that was one of the only websites that was publishing like new libertarian content every day. And it was actually one of the few blogs that was even out there at the time. Now everybody has a blog, but it was one of the few back in the day. And I really gravitated towards it. I started reading it every day. Like every morning I was eating breakfast and I would check LouRockwell.com and I would read all the articles. And at the time I was going to college at this really liberal school. Like it was UMass Amherst. Okay. This is like the hippie.
My cousin went there and actually passed out face down in a bathtub and almost died from alcohol poisoning. Because that's, from what I understood, that's a big party school. And I had mentioned earlier to you off air, which I really don't talk about that much, but I had grown up in Boston, so I'm well aware of UMass Amherst.
Yeah. It definitely was. There were lots of riots and parties there. While I was there, I didn't participate in that. I was like super serious, like way more serious than I am right now even. But yeah, so I didn't really party in college. I just read Lou Rockwell. But it was like, it kind of drove me to the right. I would say it drove me like, it was like a reaction against all these like hippie, really like left wingers, like serious left wingers. Every stereotype, every caricature that you could imagine of a left winger, that was what was going on at UMass, like all around me. And so it kind of made me like dig in my heels and become even more like almost kind of like socially conservative, and which I wouldn't say I am now. So I was like that for quite a while. And then, I actually found Free Talk Live in college. I started listening to them back in 2005. I ended up going to medical school, and I went to Dartmouth, which is in New Hampshire. And the reason I came here was so I could be in New Hampshire, right? Like I kind of wanted to do both. I wanted to go to med school, but I also wanted to live in New Hampshire. And so that's what I did. And I got here. But then my mind just was opened up in all kinds of other different ways, because I found what I really realized, I started sort of like participating in the political system. Like I moved to New Hampshire for the Free State Project, and I was like, oh, I'll get involved in the political system. But I just quickly realized that it was just such a joke, and you can't make any kind of meaningful change. I mean, I remember going down to testify in Concord on certain bills that were going to be passed in the New Hampshire legislature. And it made absolutely no difference, anything that I said, even if I prepared for it, even if I drove through the snow. People were just spending so much time and money trying to influence the political system, and it clearly wasn't working at all. And that's because you can't make any change through the political system. It's designed that way.
Yeah, it's a rigged system. I mean, it's set up, as you said, I mean, it's totally designed that way. It's set up in a way that, no matter who's in office, it's pretty much the same. And I think a lot of people go through that, where they'll say, hey, yeah, I'll try to change things through the system, and then realize pretty quick that, okay, this isn't the way to change things. And if you don't believe in the system, why would you want to try to change the system or get rid of the system by using the system? It kind of doesn't make any sense. Yeah,
I know, exactly. You hear the example a lot of like, well, if you don't like the mafia, why don't you join it and try to work within the system, and change it? I like to say, let's say you're one of those people who hates McDonald's, right? Like you don't like the way they prepare their food. It's too fatty. You got the trans fats in there and all the artificial ingredients. Why don't you go work for McDonald's and try to change it from the inside? You can't. It wouldn't work that way. And
you gotta become the CEO of the corporation, and even then.
Yeah, and even then, how could you? Yeah, it's just that everything is geared against you. So that was how I found the political system. And so once I realized that, I had a period where I was like, well, crap, what do I do? I'm here in New Hampshire. I don't really want to like go to jail and get arrested. That doesn't sound very free. And I don't want to like work within this political system. That definitely didn't feel very free. So I had a couple of years where I was like, what do I do? And then I realized that actually there are lots of things in my life that I have a lot of control over, like where I work, what my job is, what my relationships are like, where I live, and all that kind of stuff, your personal sphere of influence. And I started to get really interested in that stuff because that's the stuff that everyone can control, including me. And what I realized was that, I had some work to do in those areas. And so that's what I started doing.
Yeah, there is Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I started trying to look at my life, not the state of New Hampshire, not the
Right.
United States of America, not the wars, not the dollar, not anything like that, but my life, Stephanie, and see what I could improve to make myself feel happier and more free. And so that's sort of the page or the journey that I've been on for the last several years, and it's been going really great. It's really cool.
Yeah, there are a certain amount of things that you can do to try to live freer, and it's always a level of free, right? Because we know that no matter where you are, and as long as you're ruled over by a government, it's always a level of freedom. But there are definitely a lot of things that you can do to live freer, whether it's like you said, where you live, or how you spend your money, or things you support. So there are a lot of things that people can do, and if you believe in freedom, you should at least try to live as free as possible, which I try to do. It doesn't always work, even where, like football, for an example, where, okay, I don't want to support the NFL. I don't want to give them my money, which I was successful in doing, but, I'll still like watch the games or whatever. But I mean, things like that as well, where I won't watch any of these networks, or pretty much cut off TV except for like the movie channels. Like, I still want to watch movie channels, but, or listening to, reading books and listening to different shows, Liberty shows and things like that, or just supporting Liberty Media. So, yeah, I think a lot of people get to that point where they are like, well, what can I do? Because I think part of the reality, to an extent, and I don't like to say this, but is there's certain things that you really have no control over. And it's hard sometimes to think about those things, and then it can be frustrating, but there are things that you do have control over. And I guess it's having a balance there of, you could sit there and realize that, well, we're ruled by government, they extort people's money, they can pretty much kill you if they want to, all of these things that essentially you're a slave in a sense. But at the same time, you do have a life, and you should try to enjoy your life. And I guess kind of having a balance there, which sometimes I think I fail to do, where you get too caught up or too frustrated or whatever. But it's important, I think, to also have that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, what has more effect over your life? What the politicians are doing today and what kinds of laws they're thinking about passing and things like that, or like who you spend your time with all day. It's just crazy to think about sometimes. Like, one of the things, especially, is like people's jobs. We were starting to talk about my career change earlier. That was one of the areas where it was a really big deal for me to realize that I needed to get out of the medical field and into a field where I had more freedom and control over, what I did all day, who I hung around with all day, And
but before we get into the details on that, first off, what in the first place, what attracted you to the medical field? And I know for a while you were like a scientist, right? Or you were a medical researcher or doing things like that at one point, right?
Yeah, so this is always kind of hard to explain, but when I came to Dartmouth in 2006, I was actually in a double degree program. So it was I was going for an MD, a medical doctorate, and a PhD. And the reason I wanted to do that was to become a research scientist, trying to like cure diseases and make new cures for things. And that you could say that's a lofty goal, or you could say that's insane.
Well, I mean, it's very admirable. I think it's something that is definitely, dedicating your life to help people, or at least trying, because you you obviously found some stuff or ran into stuff where you would have a lot of obstacles to doing that. But in theory, it's a great thing to want to do.
Yeah, I mean, that it turned out to be not what I expected in a number of ways. I mean, probably the biggest way was that it didn't. So wanting to become a research doctor is wanting to like basically save the world, right? Like I just said, I wanted to cure diseases, and curing a disease is like, that's hard. It takes lots of really talented people probably working for years or maybe their entire lives or careers to actually accomplish that. And I was just like taking on these big projects like to try to save the world. And what I realized eventually is I can't save the world. Actually, most people don't want to be saved anyway. And I really, especially when I had stuff on my own in my own life to focus on, it's probably best that I focus on trying to solve my own problems before I save the whole world. So that was kind of like the conclusion that I came to. But yeah, the reason I was the reason why I said I was in med school was because I did actually go to med school for a couple of years as part of this program. And then I also got my PhD. And then I left before I finished med school. So I don't have the MD, I just have the PhD. But I did go to medical school for a couple of years. Not a very liberty friendly place.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you a little about that as well. What, I guess, kind of made you come to that decision, besides that, what you just said about, obviously not to mention all the work and how hard it would be, but all the stress and hours and all of this stuff, although it seems like you still have all that stress and hours right now, but at least you're enjoying what you're doing. But what were some of the things there? And I had said to you off air that it seems like to me, and one of the reasons why I don't trust doctors, of course, one of them being now with the government being so involved in everything and creating these databases to store your medical data. And it really seems like I see it in a couple of years, them really dictating a lot of these things that have to be done. I was actually talking about it last night. In the Obamacare bill, there's a task force that was created as part of the bill, and they give these recommendations. I guess the recommendations they've been giving for years, but now all of these recommendations are actually things that insurance companies have to cover. Right now, it's not mandated, but some of these things are really strange, like all women should get a domestic violence screening, whether they show signs or not. So I see some of these. Yeah, and I see some of these things, like even if they don't bring it up, nothing, just, you should all get one because you might not know that you've been a victim.
Yeah, why stop at the women? Why not give the men
right.
a screening too, right?
That's what my co-host yesterday brought up as well. But where I honestly see this going, and I don't think this is any type of exaggeration here, is I see that at one point, these are going to be mandatory to get a discount on insurance. And now with people being, quote unquote, forced to pay insurance, that the amount of money that you're going to have to pay if you don't get insurance is going to go way up, as it is, in the next couple of years. So either way, you're going to have to pay a huge amount of money to not comply with what they want you to do. So it's almost like blackmail, where they're not forcing you to do it, but they are, because they're saying, well, if you don't do it, you're going to have to pay a ridiculous amount of money for insurance. And if you don't get insurance, you're going to have to pay a ridiculous amount of money on taxes. And if you don't do any of that, we're going to try to just, lock you up.
Yeah, exactly. The options for, I think you're referring to Obamacare, which that would be a great thing to talk about. I mean,
yeah,
there's just so many things.
It's the task. This specifically is the task force that was created that gives these recommendations, which is all. Yeah, I mean, of course, the tax is part of Obamacare, and now that everybody is mandated to have insurance, or they have to pay a tax that is going to go up. I mean, right now it's not that much money, but yeah, and it's these. I went through the bill, and it was like 1,000 pages, so I didn't read all the detail. But
wow, you might be the only one who actually read it, right?
Well, probably read more than Congress, but I mean, you can't even read it because they have the bill portion, but then they have all these addendums based on, well, this will be decided by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and then trying to find all that. I couldn't find it, so it's ridiculous. But the stuff I kind of focused on was the information, the things that people aren't really talking about, these databases that are being created, and how now they are able to access your medical records in order to evaluate the treatment that is being given and all the shit like that. And they're getting heavily involved in, well, for this should be used. And it's just the control that the government's going to have over that stuff is ridiculous. But not to get, I guess,
they're just setting up. I mean, they're just kind of putting the stuff in place to have just an enormous, like, to just completely bureaucratize medicine. It already is bureaucratized. You know, the government already can access your health records. And when I was in med school, actually, there were some doctors who were kind of trying to fight this this push for electronic medical record systems. It seems like they really lost that battle, but there were some doctors who were just like, look, I've been doing this for however many years I've been practicing. I just want to keep paper charts on my clients and treat them as clients, not like numbers.
Yeah. And you can't do that anymore. And even my doctor had told me, and I think she's not accepting it anymore, but that for Medicare, they're mandated to keep electronic records. For,
right.
Medicare.
Yeah, that's how they do a lot of the changes with the healthcare system is they kind of strong arm the doctors through Medicare. And you can't really opt out of that either. You can't like not take Medicare patients. There were some doctors who were trying to, and they were kind of getting like, you know, suddenly finding themselves getting like threatening letters from the medical boards.
What one of my and I don't want to get into details on this, but I have a pain management doctor, and that's what starting 2015. I at least saw something posted that they're not accepting Medicare. So I don't know the details of that. But she did tell me last year or the year before that they could not take Medicare. That in order to take Medicare, they had to have electronic records because I started to get these emails from all the doctors now of these portholes and all this shit. So, yeah, I mean, it and I don't want to go into this too much because I know you have limited time, but it's even when you think about it, say somebody's, and I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, which is kind of strange, but, you know, if someone's depressed or, you know, any of these things, no one's going to go to their doctor because that's going to be out there in a record that the government can access. And as you said, I mean, they could probably always access them, but it's a lot harder to get an actual, you know, handwritten chart, but anything that's in a database, even whether they have permission or not, they're going to do it anyway. But now they're even saying, well, it's okay for us to do this. But that people are not going to want to go to any of these doctors because they know, hey, well, you know, I have a little anxiety or I'm depressed for a couple weeks and I go to a doctor and then I go to get a gun a year later and I'm told, oh, I can't have one. I mean, things like that. Are, you know, and that's probably not as bad as what could happen. I mean, with all of
or
this
you test
information-
positive for some drug and then you suddenly find yourself in handcuffs, right? I mean,
there you go.
Doctors are already obligated to report certain things. Like if you, for instance, say you're going to kill yourself or somebody else, they have to report that to, and then you can get into all kinds of situations where you're basically held involuntarily, kind of incarcerated in a hospital and stuff like that. And, you know, you could say, well, that kind of makes sense if someone's a danger to themselves or others, but what else are they going to have to report after certain periods of time, you know? And it really undermines the trust that people have in doctors. I mean, nobody trusts doctors these days, right? Like, it's hard because if you are a doctor, you need to know what happened to your patient so that you can treat them, right? Like, you need to know how they got that burn on their dick or whatever, or or you need to know like what drug they took and now their heart's beating rapidly and they can't talk or whatever. You need to know what happened to them so that you can help them.
I was making fried penis. Sorry,
but if they don't feel comfortable telling you, then you can't help them. And so you're just guessing. And it really undermines the relationship between the doctor and the patient, who really should be their client. But it turns into more of this authoritarian relationship where there's such a huge imbalance of power. And the doctor really has all the power and the patient has none except to kind of shut up like they're talking to a cop or something. And it's really a shame.
How it is. And one of actually my co-host Pete was on last night. I had asked him, and he didn't want to go into too many details because it was on the air, but we were talking about his kids and if the doctors had asked the kids any question, because they're doing this now in schools and trying to get all this information about parents, and the doctors had gotten alone with the kids and asked them questions about the parents. And it's just crazy. So I guess kind of relating this to what I really wanted to ask you about, and this hadn't passed yet, but I'm sure there are other things going on, and maybe even seeing this start to develop in something like this, or seeing what the future is going to be. So what were some of the things that you were seeing when you were in medical school that prompted you to say, okay, I don't really want to do this?
Oh gosh, there were so many things. I mean, like you said, a lot of it was the stress and the sleep deprivation and just the authoritarian kind of structure of it all. You know, like it's like there are certain doctors who are on the top, and then there's like a pyramid of power. And as a med student, you're definitely on the bottom of that. And you get all this hazing and having to sort of
Dr. Hayes.
It really is like
crazy.
a big hazing ritual to become part of the physician, hierarchy. And then you're on the top and you're doing it to someone else. And I really didn't like that structure, but also like some other disturbing things, like just the commonness with which antidepressants were prescribed. And if you actually stop to look at the evidence for whether those things work, they don't. I mean, they're not they have a very minimal benefit compared to a placebo pill for actually anything but like really severe kinds of depression. Nobody knows how they work.
Well,
Nobody really cares
sorry.
about the side effects.
Yeah.
They're just kind of given to people, including kids who don't really, they don't have the ability to consent. Like a lot of times kids are just given drugs like Ritalin or whatever because they're inconvenient for their parents or their teachers. And that's just so wrong and fucked up. And I couldn't like deal with that.
Yeah, one of the things that we were actually talking about this last night, there was a story in Minnesota school district where they want to do screenings of high school kids for anxiety and depression. And of course, their bullshit rationale that they present is that, well, suicide is a second leading cause of death of, teenagers or some bullshit. But we started to talk about the SSRIs and what doctors will do now if you ask them for something, say for depression or for anxiety, just to take for a small window of time, instead of giving you something that, you just take it for that time, when you have some anxiety, and then when it's gone, then you don't have to take it anymore. They'll get you hooked on the SSRIs, which you have to take every day forever, essentially. And not only, of course, is it off of. Yeah, and and I've taken them before. When you stop, you get these the withdrawal is actually really bad. But they'll give those away like it's nothing. But then when it comes to like Xanax or something like that I'm not saying that's great neither. But at least with that, okay, if you have a spell of depression or anxiety, well, Xanax not for depression, but you can just take it for a couple days or for, have it for when it's just really bad. And it's not something that builds up the chemicals in your brain like the SSRIs do. So they don't care about those. And that seems to be the stuff that, of course, the pharmaceutical companies are making all this money off of as well.
Oh, yeah. There's just so many things about that whole situation. And I'm sorry to hear about your experience. I'm sure it's not easy to get off those drugs. And they're given out so freely, but the patients aren't really told about like, hey, just to warn you, it's going to be difficult to get off this drug, or hey, these are some of the side effects.
I meant to say I know somebody that took them before that had the. That's what I meant. Sorry about that.
Yeah, right.
I knew somebody that took them before, so yeah. Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, but the patients are just so seldom told about these different effects, and then they kind of find out the hard way, and then they end up like mistrusting doctors because of that. And it's just a big mess. And of course, nobody ever talks about the real issues, which if someone's depressed, maybe they need a human being to talk to. Maybe they need to find a therapist, or maybe they need to find a friend that they can talk to, and talk therapy doesn't have any side effects except that it takes time and it's maybe a little more expensive than taking a pill. But if you're looking for long-term lasting happiness, that's the way to go, not some medication that could potentially harm you in a number of different ways and probably won't even work.
So, again, in
not medical advice. Don't just a disclaimer.
Yeah, I know you always gotta say
I'm not
that.
a medical doctor. Not medical advice. It's just my opinion, though. I think that the underlying issues that might cause someone to be depressed or anxious are never talked about among physicians, and I think they they really ought to be looked at first.
Well, I think that's what pretty much everything that government, especially because they don't really care and they have some hidden agenda most of the time is why, but they never look at the actual root of the problem. They just want to look at, for example, violence. Oh, if you just, let's get rid of guns. Not looking at the, well, why are people doing this in the first place? They just want to get rid of guns because, of course, they exploit all of these events or things that happen to push an agenda. So that's why, they don't really care. But, in general, no one looks at, well, what's really the root of the problem? It's just, how can we exploit this to push some agenda?
Yeah. Oh, there's just everybody's looking for a quick fix. And, all the incentives in the medical system are kind of set up to encourage that. Like with insurance companies, right? The doctors, they may not get their pay for 6 months, a year. They may have to haggle with all these people to try to get paid. And the insurance companies are basically taking dictates from the government and setting the prices for different procedures and things through the Medicare prices. And so, as a result, the doctors get busier and busier. They have to take on more patients to kind of like pay their bills. And so then they cut down their appointment times and they're spending like 15 minutes with each person. And you just can't like get to the bottom of an emotional issue or something like that in that short of a time. And so what do? They're just like, oh, well, here, take this pill. And that's why people don't trust doctors, because they feel like they're not being listened to. And they're right. They're not being listened to. So the whole system, Dave, is just so messed up. Like we were saying before about government, it's like the whole system is stacked against you. That's kind of how I felt in medicine. Like there were just so many problems that I felt like there was no possible way I could pull off a Ron Paul and work within the system to try to change it. And even if I tried to do that, I wouldn't be very happy personally. And so I decided to just leave. It wasn't any kind of question of like, I wasn't doing well in med school. I had one of the best, scores in my class on those board exams and things like that. It was just that I couldn't do it. I couldn't go through with being a part of this system that it really felt like it was just going to steamroll itself over me so hard and just kind of crush my spirit in the process. And I'm glad, I'm glad I did change careers. It was sad. It was a sense of loss. I put in a lot of time to try to go down
2
that
years.
path.
And do you still owe, did you have loans for that, or do you still owe
I don't.
money,
I don't have any loans, which is great. It was actually like a scholarship program that I was on,
great.
Which is very rare. So I didn't incur any debt, I'm really lucky about that, and I'm glad about that.
Yeah, because then that would have been even worse. Like, okay, not only do I put all this into it, but now I owe all this money.
Yeah, absolutely. It traps people in that profession. There were lots of people who I knew from my med school class who basically, kind of didn't really want to continue. Like they were not feeling enthusiastic about keeping going in medicine, but they were like, well, there's no way I'll pay off all these loans if I don't. And so what happens then is these medical students graduate, and they're all trying to pay off their loans. And even before they do that, they have to go to residency, which is like you basically make McDonald's wages, working 80 hours a week. And that happens for 4 years. And then you've paid your dues, and then you can become a physician and make bank, hopefully. But actually, physicians don't make bank, not all of them anyway, especially if they're in like family practice or a specialty like that. The dermatologists and the plastic surgeons and anesthetists are like the highest earning type of physicians. And so all the new doctors try to compete for those jobs.
Well, it seems like the ones that don't have to deal with insurance as much make more money, and that all of these regulations as well. Because like plastic surgeons and dermatologists to an extent, but there's a lot of procedures that they do that people pay out of pocket. So it sounds like, that's why they make more money. Everybody else that has to deal with, the insurance companies. And then I know with the billing codes, what they just redid, they need all these people now. They have to hire more people to do the billing, and just that because of the whole government intervention there, that a lot of them aren't making any money from that as well because of all, insurance also, malpractice insurance and just all of this shit that they have to pay for, that it makes it harder and harder for them to make money. And it sounds like now what they want to do with Obamacare and changing these costs, that a lot of doctors may not want to be doctors anymore. But you brought up an interesting
There's
point.
a lot of doctors retiring now, actually,
Yeah,
because they just see the writing on the wall and they're like, there's no way this is going to work. I mean, there have been some doctors who have tried to go to like cash only practices where they don't accept insurance in any form. And that can work.
Concierge medicine, they have it as well, where they have, I don't know if you're referring to that, where everyone pays, you pay like $400 a month and they only accept a certain amount of patients. So you get better care or more focused care or whatever.
But and those are attempts to sort of bring that relationship back to the doctor and the client, their patient. But it's hard because the system doesn't like that. And many people who are paying for concierge medicine subscriptions also are forced to be insured in the normal system. And so
it's not going to cover,
they're just paying extra.
It's not going to cover like hospital visits or anything like that. And then, at the same time now where insurance is mandatory through the government, where you're going to have to pay this big fine. And if people haven't looked at this, I mean, it goes way up. I think it even goes to an either or percentage of income type thing where you may be paying, $3,000-$4,000, at least more than insurance. Because what it's really doing is, it's forcing you to get insurance. And if you don't get it, you're going to be paying more in taxes at some point, I guess, depending on how much money you make. But the whole thing is
just
insane.
Forcing the younger, healthier people to subsidize the people who are going to use the insurance more. And I mean, you could debate about that from an ethical perspective, but what I know is that as a 30-year-old woman, I'm being forced to pay for stuff that I don't need. Okay. I mean, under Obamacare, I have to get coverage for maternity coverage, even though I don't plan to have any children. Even if I was like sterilized, I would have to get maternity coverage, which is kind of ridiculous. I had to get everybody has to get pediatric dental coverage, which why is that in there? Even if you have no children. So it's just like you're paying for stuff that you don't need.
Well, it's even the thing that people don't, I think, realize, although I think they've denied this, that if you end up owing money, they won't come after you. But just like everything else, I mean, it's enforced by violence or by the threat of violence. So at the end, if you don't get insurance and you don't pay these taxes, if they aren't able to somehow take it from you. Now, I had a conversation with somebody, and it was about civil suits and not paying them and how, well, you'll never actually, quote unquote, go to jail for them or come after you. But that's debatable. But in the end, I mean, what are they going to do if you're somebody who they can't seize your money in order to pay this off? Because they could say, well, they'll just go to court and, take money directly out of your check. But still, I mean, at the end, if you owe taxes,
what if you don't have a bank account?
Yeah, if you don't have any, or you work for somebody and they're paying you in cash, if there's no way for them to seize that money, and either way, it's still threat of force against somebody. And this is kind of the, I guess, debate I had when I was talking about this, that if it's the bank, it's threat of force against the bank to force them to give the money. If it's your job, they're forcing your job. At some point, they're forcing somebody to do something via threat of violence, whether it's you or not, because in that situation, well, okay, if they are able to get it from the bank or from a job, technically they're not coming after you personally. I mean, they are by attacking your assets, but they're not using literal violence, but they're still using it against these other entities. And I don't know exactly how that would work if they didn't give that. But I mean, it's still the government forcing themselves upon people and businesses and
who could argue that that's actually cool or good? I mean, we don't know exactly what they're going to do if people don't pay, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who don't pay the tax for not having insurance. But the point is, they could do it. They could enforce it by forcefully if they wanted to,
and they probably will at some point. That's the whole thing, that a lot of these things start. And I was actually talking about this last night with the thing I mentioned, the screenings for anxiety and depression at high schools now that they want to do in Minnesota. But that it may start as, oh, well, if you don't pay it, we'll just, garnish your wages. But I mean, at some point, just because they say that now, does that mean at some point that they're going to charge you with a crime? And
the other flip side of this is like, there are people out there who are saying, I'm poor. Like, well, the government comes out with these statements that if you're too poor to afford health insurance, oh, well, then they kind of switch into this mode of helping you, right? Or quote, helping you, because they want you to
Yeah.
give them all of your information, your medical information, your social security number, all your personal data, and then they'll pay for your health insurance. But what they do is actually get you signed up with the health insurance company, and then they cut a check to them. And so it's like you're still giving the government your health information. You still don't have control over this very
Right.
important service that everybody needs at some point, which is healthcare. And so it's like they're helping people, but they're also controlling them a lot, like
Well, it's all
having
about-
a lot of control over them.
It's all about control. It's just like if you're in a situation where you're relying on somebody else for money, whether it's you're married
Yeah.
and you rely on your spouse to support you, or you're a kid and you rely on your parents, that's a form of control. So the government's the same way. The more that you get from them, the more control they're able to exercise over you. But I want to make sure we get to some other stuff and get into the how you got into media and your voiceovers as well. So at that point, when you're going to school, did you start doing any voiceover or media work yet, or did that come later?
Yeah, I did. Okay, so I started podcasting as a hobby in 2009. And after a couple years of doing it and improving as I went along.
Were you still going to school at that point?
Yeah,
Okay.
I was working on my PhD. So the way the program I was in was structured was like I was going to go to med school for 2 years, then take a break from med school, do my PhD, and then go back and finish med school. So I left before I did the second half of med school. But at this point, I was working on my PhD. And as a hobby, I just, started this podcast. And after a couple of years of doing it and listening back to my shows and trying to get better and stuff, people started saying, "Oh, Stephanie, you have a nice voice." And in fact, actually, like I think my first week of med school, I met a woman who was in my class, and she said, "Oh, you should be like an audiobook narrator or something. You have a really nice voice." And nobody had ever said that to me before. So it was kind of like, "Oh, thank you. That's a nice compliment." But it turned out that she was actually totally right.
And I heard
And
you do accents as well, so you'll have to do one of those before you go. But sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I'll have to think about which one to do.
Definitely a Russian one, and then whatever other one you want. I heard your Russian accent there, so you'll have to share that.
They have ways of making you talk. But yeah, people started telling me I had a nice voice, and eventually I started thinking about it, and I was sort of thinking at that point, well, if this whole like medical research thing doesn't work out, what am I going to do? What's my plan B? And I started to think about it, and I was like, well, I really would love to work from home. I would love to not have to get up every morning and get dressed. And I'd love to just roll out of bed and be able to start working if that's what I want to do, or, have some breakfast or whatever. Like, be able to plan my own day and my own schedule. That was something I never really had the chance to do, because going from government school to college to med school, it was like I was always having my time planned out for me, and I didn't like that. And so the most important thing to me was to be able to have a little more control over my day, over my daily schedule. And so I started thinking, well, hey, this whole voiceover thing, I'm sure there's a lot more to it, a lot I would have to learn. But if I could actually pull it off, that would enable me to sit around in my pajamas all day if I wanted to, or work in my pajamas. And it would enable me to work from home and have more control over my life. And so I started researching it. And, these days, the barriers to entry are lower, just like with being the media. The barriers to entry to becoming a voice actor or a narrator of audiobooks are much lower. People can afford microphones. You don't have to go to a fancy studio. Right. You can build one in your house, and
all the
people
technology,
do.
Yeah, that is affordable now, and with the internet and computers and all that stuff, where probably like 20, 30 years ago was a lot harder.
Yeah, and it's a great thing. You don't have to make a demo tape and actually like physically mail copies to agents. I mean, could you imagine? Now we have online casting sites, and we've got places on the internet where you can even get started for free. Like with audible.com, there's a site behind Audible, which is ACX, and ACX is Audiobook Creation Exchange. And what it does is it's a matchmaking site between narrators and authors. and an author can post their title there and find a narrator to produce an audiobook for them. Now, the quality of said narrators varies a lot. Some of them are real professionals and others are just starting out. But the point is, anyone can go on that site for free and start producing audiobooks. And ACX has guidelines about it and how to make it sound good. So the barriers to entry are just so much lower. And I started researching it and reading about it. And it, everything I found said, look, it's hard to make a full-time living as a voice actor, but you can do it if you're savvy and if you practice. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm really willing to try this. And I did practice a lot. I joined a bunch of online casting sites, including ACX, made a bunch of audiobooks, did a lot of honing my craft. Wasn't expecting to really be able to make a living off of it for several years, but I did. Actually, right away, I started making a living, and I remember the point when I started making more money than I was making as a graduate student, because you get paid like a lowly stipend when you're a PhD student. And when I started earning more money than I was as a graduate student, I was like, yes, I'm on the right track, and I felt really encouraged. And so, yeah, fast forward almost 2 years from when I left medical school, and now here I am. I'm a full-time voice actor. Every day, my day usually starts by checking my email, finding some clients who've emailed me with projects, completing those projects, sending them the audio through the internet. All of this done in my home, in a very comfortable way. I can wear whatever I want. I can eat breakfast whenever I want, take a break whenever I want, or work all night if I want to. And that's kind of what I did tonight, what I usually end up doing. But yeah, I usually have a couple clients every day. I may send some auditions, spend a couple hours sending auditions, work on all different kinds of projects. Today I did a TV commercial and a medical narration, actually. And so I can use my medical and scientific skills and that vocabulary to actually narrate medical and scientific voiceover projects.
Right, where you can pronounce the words where people that aren't familiar maybe can't read them or pronounce them or anything.
Yes. Echocardiogram,
Right.
diverticulitis.
So that's helpful. I mean, it's great to see people starting their or working independently and starting their own independent ventures or businesses, especially liberty-oriented people, because it's not that easy anymore to do that. Where it is, but it's not. Like, as you talked about barriers to entry now with the internet and things like that, it has helped specific industries, but in general, the amount of regulations and money and things like that make it harder to get into all these other businesses. So I guess on one side, it's great because of technology, but as far as the government making it so much harder to get involved in other types of businesses, it's great to see people that are able to accomplish that. And I think it's good to show that to people as well, so they can see that for, hey, look, she did this and she, dedicated herself to doing it and was able to do it, as an inspiration to other people.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dave. I'm really happy to talk to people about it, because that was basically the biggest thing I did for my personal freedom. And it really bumped it up a lot, to be working for myself instead of for someone else.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a huge thing, because, you don't have to worry about, a boss and a lot of these things. And basically,
Yeah.
Depending on people's situations, your life is really hanging in the balance of, somebody else kind of controls it to an extent, especially if you don't have money saved up to be able to support yourself if you lose your job. But really, I mean, that's how it is. And I think we're in a society now that promotes, spend all your money and doesn't value making sacrifices or anything like that. So most people will say, well, I got to have this, so I'm going to run up my credit card and spend all my money and not save anything. And I think too many people do that. And having financial independence and financial freedom is a huge thing when it comes to having freedom in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you were saying before, it has become harder to get into certain entrenched industries that are really heavily regulated. And I feel like voiceover and online business, and, maybe even being like a Kindle author, or, just start doing internet marketing or starting one of your own businesses online, that is really the last realm that is unregulated, or that is
I think
not
it's hard.
licensed. And
it's hard for them to really regulate that. the industry.
I guess someone could always say like, oh, I'm going to give someone a bad voiceover, but there's not exactly calls for licensing or anything like that. Maybe some of the old hat pros in the industry would like that, but it hasn't happened, and I'm glad for it because it's enabled me to get my foot in the door. But what I wanted to really say was that if you are at a job that you are not quite happy at, just start doing a little research in your spare time. Nights and weekends, just look online and find some information about what kind of online business you can start. If you just do a couple Google searches, it'll come to you. And I actually read The 4-Hour Workweek. That was one thing that was really helpful to me by Tim Ferriss, getting in the mindset of getting ready to explore a career change. So I'd recommend that to anybody who's sort of thinking about it. And there's just tons of free information out there on the internet. You can start a side business right now too. Like there's nobody stopping you. Even if you do have a day job, nobody's stopping you from doing a side hustle or a little online business that you can just work on in your spare time and see where it goes, right?
And I think that's one of probably the best ways to do it. And definitely, as I mentioned earlier, with the technology, there are all these opportunities that weren't there before. So if it's an internet type business or selling stuff on the internet or whatever, or even doing a radio show which is hard to probably end up being successful at least from a financial standpoint, but still. And I think a lot of what it is people get comfortable. They're scared. They tend to think, well, I can't do this. It's too complicated. And I feel comfortable at my little job here. And they spend their lives working for somebody else when they could do something that they enjoy and could have more control really over their life. Because really, the company that you work for really does control your life to a certain extent for the majority of people. Again, I mean, if you have a ridiculous amount of money saved up, but even then, I mean, I have some money saved up, but I wouldn't want to lose my job and then, go through the money in a few months or whatever.
Absolutely. And they're before you know it, they're sort of controlling your behavior too, because you're thinking, oh, I don't want to post this on Facebook because my boss might see it and I might get in trouble.
No,
and
definitely. Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say,
they really there's so many companies that just act like parents almost.
Yeah,
and like
definitely.
they're just controlling all these aspects of people's lives. And then they're controlling your health insurance. And so they're controlling what you do with your body in a sense. And you have to give certain information to them to get a discount on the health insurance, which is really like just charging you a fee to not give it up. And
one of the things they ask is the smoking, you get a discount for smoking, not smoking. I mean, and for living a healthy lifestyle, you check that off. But yeah, it's really crazy when you think about the control. And I knew people that I would, one of the things I first started doing when I guess I started getting somewhat active, because I got to a point where I'm like, okay, I have to do something, was, posting all these articles all over people's walls and tagging them in it and stuff like that. And I had people that they didn't necessarily disagree with what I was posting, but they're like, well, my job might see this. And, why would you want to live like that? Like, to be honest, and the thing that I do is I don't talk about, where I work or whatever. I don't know that's a big deal if they would have a problem with it. There's some people that I work with that actually listen to the show, but, I'm not going to not say something or live in fear of speaking out. And if because of that, they don't want me there, then fine. But I'm not going to let that stop me. But a lot of people will, and they will be scared. Yeah. And it may not even be a thing that the company has come out and said anything. They might just be scared. Well, I don't think my company would like this. And based off of that, it's like they're going to suppress their own speech and they're not going to speak out. And it's kind of sad in a way.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could even say as a Liberty person that, well, it's voluntary. You chose to work there, so you have to accept any kind of censorship that they might impose on you. But actually, like, if you think about it, why would you choose to work, if you had a better option, why would you choose to work somewhere where you were having censorship imposed on you, right? Where you were in fear of your livelihood for just expressing opinions,
Well,
right?
It gets to a point, too, where, and I'm not saying that the work in or job industry or whatever you want to call that at this point is to this point. But, with government, people will say, well, if you don't like it here, go move someplace else. But the fact is that governments have taken over the whole world. So I think with other things, you can, to an extent, get to that point where it's like, okay, yeah, well, it's free market, but it's been taken over to the point where there's no other options. And I think that is possible. But it definitely is what's happened with governments, where government has taken over the whole world. So you can't move anyplace else. I mean, there are some places
the only place you can move is to the internet. That's the only thing you can do, is really just move most of your operations, your life to the internet.
You download your conscience on there eventually, I guess.
Well, yeah, I don't know about that, but definitely my business,
Yeah. But I mean, even as far as, moving someplace else, and I'm sure there's some places that are freer in different aspects, but still, I mean, the whole world has been taken over, where all the land is controlled by rulers. So you don't have an option. So that ridiculous, well, if you don't like it here, why don't you leave, is bullshit.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And then when you actually try to leave, they try to make you pay taxes, and it's hard to renounce your citizenship. So actually you can't really leave.
Yeah, it's trying to keep people in, and that's why I think they want a wall around Mexico. The real reason is to keep people in as opposed to getting them out, because they have pledged everybody's future labor to whoever the creditor is, and all this debt that's owed is based on the collateral is people. But so from the you started doing voiceover work, and you're obviously now successful at that. And regarding your podcast, how did you come up with? You said Pork Therapy was the first one that you started.
Yeah.
Right? So, and that was more, from what I understand, it was a kind of more of a relationship kind of advice kind of show. Is that?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. It was relationship advice from sort of like a liberty loving perspective. And at one point it was like a weekly show too, where I did a live show, and I talked more about like news articles and stuff. But I would always go into this sort of like psychology realm and, relationship communication related stuff, because that was what was interesting to me.
And so, and just for everybody, that has dirty minds there, the pork was for porcupine, right? For is that what's that, the state bird of New Hampshire? It's not actually a bird, but no, it's a porcupine, like the Porcupine Freedom Festival and all that.
It was, but in retrospect, it was a terrible name because it was really inside baseball, and people would find it and be like, "What, pork therapy? What's that?" And some people thought I was a therapist, which I'm not, and so it was very confusing. So that's one of the reasons why it's kind of on hiatus now, because I've been wanting to change the name, but then I wasn't sure if I wanted to start it back up. But yeah, that's basically what it was about.
People thought it
we
was
did
about
talk about
getting bacon
we did talk
massages.
about sex. But, yeah,
I know, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but I know from listening to Free Talk Live a little, some of the stuff that you guys kind of didn't go into detail, of course, because it's it was on the radio, so it was came into the jurisdiction of the FCC, but even in some of your other interviews have gotten into, I guess, some more, I don't even know how I'd phrase it.
Risque topics.
Yeah, which is fine. But yeah,
for sure. I think being able to talk about that kind of stuff, just the personal in general, whether it's of a sexual nature or what, just the personal stuff is so important, because if you can't talk about that stuff, then you're not free. And so many people just have all these emotional issues that are holding them back, weighing them down, making them not free in their lives. And the only way that that's ever going to change is if they start to hear other people talking about it and then maybe talk about it themselves. So that's kind of why I wanted to do a show like that.
Yeah, and I know you also did with Brian, what was it, Sex and Science as well? That
Sex and Science Hour.
You occasionally got into some sex on that show as well?
Yeah, that was a podcast that was on the Let's Talk Bitcoin network. And Let's Talk Bitcoin is the other podcast that I'm still a part of. And Sex and Science Hour was really kind of a spin-off of Pork Therapy. It was a show where we just would talk about sex and science news and listener emails, kind of relationship questions. And then we had to throw in some Bitcoin stuff in there too, just to get it to be to fit with the Let's Talk Bitcoin network.
Right.
So we had these random Bitcoin stories in there with sex topics, and it was kind of funny.
I listened to
yeah.
a couple of shows after I had Brian on. Just for everybody who doesn't know, Brian Sovereign is your, I guess, significant other, I guess, if you want to put it that way. I know you always say my
Yeah.
partner. Are you guys against, I know Brian was married before, as I had him on the show, but are you guys just against marriage just as a government institution, or is it something that you are thinking about doing in the future, or are you going to, what's your stance on marriage?
Yeah, I don't ever plan on getting married. I think there's no way it could possibly be a good idea for me. And not only on the government front, because obviously I oppose the state being a party to my personal love relationship. Like, that's just offensive. But but as far as like promising to love someone forever, you can't. I mean, if they continue to treat you well and to be a supportive, good partner, then yeah, of course you'll keep on loving them. But if they don't, then you can't promise that you will love them, even if they change or whatever. So yeah, I don't think that whole idea works. Like, if the relationship is good, both people will voluntarily want to keep being in it. Right. So why would you want an artificial thing outside of that to keep you in the relationship when you may not want to be in it? Right. Like, if one person stops wanting to be in the relationship, shouldn't they be able to get out?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, the thing that I always thought about, and I'm actually engaged. So,
congratulations. Now I've put my foot in my mouth.
No, that's okay. That's been I think we've been engaged for like a year and a half now. But yeah, I honestly, the whole state thing, I really don't like. I think we could just get married as just a ceremony and not recognized by the state. Although they do things to try to force it upon you, because if you want to have any of these rights when you die without the government seizing everything, it's almost like in a sense I know you can get legal agreements and stuff like that, but but
you're right. It is harder to just get like power of attorneys and things like that. It's really convenient the way that they package all these special rights in with marriage, and that's how they get you. Most of the
definitely.
Time.
But
or there are some partners who, sometimes the partner wants like the security, especially if there's kids involved. They want the security of it being harder for you to exit the relationship if the going gets tough. And I suppose I can see that perspective, but it's not really my style.
Well, one of the issues I have in general is that the way that, and I think it has to do with government as well. And I know earlier you kind of mentioned something with all these things, and I don't recall exactly how you phrased it, but almost like, the influence of government. So I think everything in society is influenced by government. Like you were saying about, looking at animals and how these things aren't here, but they're all in our society. And that, I think a lot of it stems from government. It's all by design. So one of the things that I think is good for government and their agenda and their objectives are people getting married and having kids. And you grow up with that kind of being drummed into your head. And I don't think there's anything wrong with not going along with what's, I guess, society to an extent kind of promotes or accepts. And I think it's changed more where less people are getting married, but it's almost like, from the time you're born and growing up, that's, oh, well, you got to get married and have kids, and that's just what you do. And the thing is, you don't.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't look at things as, well, I have to do this because, society says this is what you do. But if I look at something, okay, if this is something I end up doing because I want to do it, then that's fine. But I think questioning those societal norms is a good thing as well. And I think part of being free also being free from things, being kind of pushed on you just because of what's, the expectations, I guess, of society in general.
Oh, yeah. I totally agree with you. I mean, really well said there. As long as it's a genuine choice, like, that's great. That's what freedom is, right? If you feel like it fits and it feels natural for you to have a committed relationship and maybe even to have a party or a ceremony, go for it, right? But so many people just get married or even have children, create new humans because they think they're supposed to, and they don't have a reason beyond that. And that's so sad. That's not fair to the new human you created. It's not fair to you. It's not honoring your needs and like how you naturally feel. So Yeah, I mean, I would really hope that people would go about things like marriage and having kids in a conscious way where they're really genuinely choosing based on how they feel, not based on the messages, subtle or not, that they're getting from society.
Right. And you even have people, that are gay that end up getting married and having kids just because of a lot of what they see as these pressures of society where, and just with marriage in general, I think even heterosexual people, they just expect, okay, well, this is what I'm supposed to do. And maybe it's not what they want. And maybe that's one of the reasons that a lot of marriages end in divorce. And it might be to your point as well, that most people, to love somebody for the rest of your life or to be with the same person, maybe that's not what a lot of people are, or people in general are created that way or whatever. But either way.
I think a lot of people who are our age, I think you're about the same age as me, right? I'm 30 years old.
Well, on the show, I say I'm 28, but I'm really a lot older. I'll have to tell you off air.
Okay.
Well, maybe I'm not. I'm 28. Let's pretend I'm 28.
Okay. Well, I think you're still probably around the same age as me. And a lot of people in our generation, I guess, or age group, grew up and saw their parents getting divorced left and right, and people who they knew their parents getting divorced. And so it kind of like broke the I don't know, the veil of legitimacy on marriage. Like, marriage was not something that they saw. If their parents got divorced, marriage was not this sacred institution that can never be broken, that it's sometimes made out to be. It was something that did get broken for their family, and that probably impacted a lot of people in such a way that they don't want to perpetuate that tradition. They don't want to get married now because they don't see the everlastingness or the legitimacy of marriage,
Yeah, my parents, my father died like 4 years ago, but until then my parents were together. But yeah, I knew a lot of people like my cousins, parents that got divorced, and just friends, and there were a lot of divorced kids at school. Well, they weren't divorced, but their parents were divorced. So yeah, I mean, I think at that point, maybe in the 80s and early 90s, that the divorce rates kind of went up, and people that grew up in those times saw a lot more divorces. Unfortunately, I think what you have now is people are still having kids, not only that aren't married, but they're not really even together, or you have that happening, and that's not and one of the things that I wanted to mention this because I thought of it, and I don't know if you'd ever seen the movie Idiocracy, where you have in the beginning, they show what the movie's about is it's in the future where everybody's really stupid because basically that's what persevered. I mean, it was all the stupid people having kids, and in the beginning it shows the smart people, and they well we don't know if we want to have kids because they have all these legitimate reasons, and they don't have kids, and then the high school dropouts that are just sitting on the couch watching TV all day drinking beer have all the kids, and then everybody's stupid. But I mean, and of course it's a comedy. It was Mike Judge from Beavis and Butthead, but the point kind of remains that and I think of like you and Brian, who are two very intelligent people, and I know he's whatever, he had a vasectomy or whatever, so I know whether you wanted to have kids or not, that you guys are going to have kids. So it kind of
we're part of the problem.
Right. Well, it kind of reminded me of that as well, because that is true to an extent, that you have a lot of people that and it's not really just an intelligence thing per se, but it's kids are growing up with parents that are a lot younger, that getting brought up in a certain way, that all kind of plays into the whole government control thing and government education. And
well, I think
kids.
you're right about, or maybe what you're trying to say is like a lot of kids don't have a lot of stability in their homes growing up. Like, forget the number of parents for a second or whatever, but a lot of kids just don't have stability in their lives growing up, and that makes them act in certain way, like that pushes their personality to be more prone to maybe statism, maybe aggression, maybe whatever, lower IQ or something.
Well, the government
they're
ends
fighting
up
for survival.
ends up raising them as well at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's like if you have, and I think even some of that is by design when you look at, how you used to have families that one parent could work and actually afford to support a family. You don't have that anymore now. Even if parents are together, both of them are working. A lot of parents aren't together, so it's one family income and they can't spend any time with their kids, and basically they get left at government babysitting really is what it is, and that's what they're brought up by, whether it's being at school and then being at daycare and all of that, especially government schools, but even the people that bring them up at daycare or after school or whatever, that's what they're getting. They're being raised by the state to a certain extent.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of, I don't know. I hate to be one of those people who thinks that idiocracy is going to come true. I certainly don't think that. In a lot of ways,
I mean, it was an
getting better,
extreme because it was a comedy. But
yeah.
But I mean,
yeah,
it makes a point, really, is that, I don't know that that's what's going to happen either, but it makes a point in, I guess, a humorous way. Not that it was a great movie neither, but yeah,
but there are a lot of people who are having children unconscious, like having children by accident, having children that they don't want and can't take care of. And that's so not fair. That's another person. Like, they need love, they need stability, they need your support as a parent. And I mean, just don't do it. Like, put on a condom before you create a human like that you can't take care of, really. Yeah. Plan it out, think it through. I don't mean to like lecture people, but that's another person you're talking about, and it's gonna have big consequences for their life if they're not able to be cared for in the way that they deserve as a human being when they're a child.
No, definitely. And I talked a little last night as well about kids having, or people under 18 not having the same rights as everybody else, and how really 18 is just an arbitrary age that the government has come up with, and why do you not own yourself at 15 or 16 or 17, and how parents have that, they own their kids, not their kids own themselves, and they kind of forget about that self ownership there. But I know that you we kind of went over your time limit there. Is it something where you have to go, like you have something that you have to do, or are you able to stay a little longer, or
maybe like one more question, because I haven't eaten dinner yet and I'm super hungry.
Sure. And I know you're busy, so again, I appreciate you coming on the show. It's just there's so many things to ask, and one of the things that I do is definitely when I have people on is try to get into more detail than, I guess, a general interview that just, asks some questions and whatever. I like to get into.
Yeah, it's been great so far,
detail.
Dave. I really appreciate all your questions. You're a great interviewer.
Thank you. So one of the things I had asked you off air, we might as well just talk about briefly, and I'm sorry we didn't get to Bitcoin. Maybe you could come on again and we could talk about Bitcoin, because that's not something I really have talked much about on the show at all. So we can do that another time, though. So from what I've got from looking at a lot of your videos on YouTube, and you confirmed this for me as well, that Stefan Molyneux, who I didn't know who he was until I heard his name on Free Talk Live, but I wasn't the type of person, I guess, that was involved in following all these liberty media people or even reading books. I mean, a lot of the ideas that I got, I kind of, to a point, developed a lot of them on my own, where even growing up, I mean, I can't remember a time where I didn't think drugs should be legal, or, guns, there shouldn't be restriction on guns, and whether that's because of my parents or whatever. I mean, I was always that type of person. Not that I was like I am now saying I don't believe in government. That came later. But so I don't know as much of, I know more about them now, but it's not like I knew a lot of these people. So I'm just mentioning that to say that doesn't mean just because I didn't know who he was, that he's not, very popular in the liberty movement, because from what I understand, he is. But so Stefan Molyneux was, it sounded like a big influence as far as, he had his podcasts and his YouTube videos, and he talks more about, it seems like, philosophy. And from what I've heard of his peaceful parenting, and I probably would need to hear more about it in detail, but it seems similar to my views on how you should treat kids as well. and not this kind of authoritarian upbringing of kids. And what do you expect if you tell kids, do this because I say so, and then they grow up to obey the state and worship the state? I mean, where do you think they get it from in the first place? But
right.
But so, it seemed like you were influenced a lot by him. But recently there has been a lot of, I guess, quote unquote, controversies there, where some of the stuff sounded, I guess there was some anti-woman stuff that he had said. And one of the things that I think was talked about a lot, at least on Free Talk Live and other shows, was he had asked somebody, or not asked them, like sued them or legally filed something to get someone to take down a YouTube video that criticized him, was one of the things. So what I really wanted to ask is, based on a lot of these things that have come up, how has your opinion changed or not changed? And how do you view him now? Or has that, do you still, look at the old stuff and say that was great, but, I don't know about this new stuff? Or what are your views on that?
Yeah, it's so interesting to think about this stuff. I mean, first, I want to say, I got so much out of Free Domain Radio. You were correct in saying that it was a huge influence on me. And I started listening back in maybe 2008. And oh God, I got so much important stuff out of it. Things about peaceful parenting, about my own childhood, looking back on my past trauma and processing it, and all kinds of stuff like that. Statism, religion, just getting super clear on all those points was just so great and so important for me. And Steph just did a really great job with that. And then, as you noted, the show has taken sort of a different turn in the last couple of years. And I noticed it. I started to notice it back in, I don't know, maybe around 2013 or 14. Just within the last couple of years. And yeah, I mean, it's really different now, and I don't listen like I used to. And I don't really want to get into any kind of drama or mudslinging, but yeah, definitely the focus on women didn't do it for me. I disagree with some of the stuff that he said about that, but there's so much to agree with in there too. So it's really tough to come out with just a soundbite about what I think of it. But it really shouldn't matter what I think of it. I mean, I think nobody's perfect, right? I'm not perfect, certainly. I'm a media personality, and I say all kinds of things. And
when
my
you
opinions
talk
change.
but when you talk that much too, and there's just even me from now doing the show 8 or 9 months or something, that when you're talking that much, I guess sometimes you're probably going to say things that maybe are misinterpreted, or maybe you didn't mean to say, or whatever. So I guess that's, that factors into it as well. I'm not saying that's the case with him. I'm just saying in general.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I understand that as someone who makes media, especially when you've done, 3,000 podcasts. Right. Of course, there are going to be
a million hours of
inconsistencies in there or whatever. Right. And there's so much good stuff. But I think with anybody, there's a lot, people focus on stuff a lot because he is a big deal. He's really popular. He attracts a lot of attention. But you could really say this about anybody in the media or any celebritarian or whatever, is that nobody's perfect. Okay. And everybody has some really valuable stuff to say and some stuff that's not so valuable. And so your job as a listener is to take the stuff that can help you and the stuff that's of value and hold on to that and explore that and keep it, and then just leave the rest, right? And so that's what I try to do with anybody, right? And, as far as my own opinion about it, it's just my opinion. And if anyone's hanging on my word and trying to figure out what to do based on what I say, then that's something to examine too, because, make up your own mind, make your own decisions.
Well, I mean, I guess from a standpoint of I never listened to him. So it's not something I really, and I'm not just going to go by what you say, but I mean, the stuff I've heard was more secondhand from, say, Free Talk Live, or I heard clips or whatever. So I don't really know enough, to be honest, to really to form an opinion, because I'd have to I was trying to listen to some of his videos to try to come up with an impression, because I was going to call Free Talk Live and do an impression of him, but I didn't think I got it good enough, so I didn't do that. But that was just more to be stupid. But as far as knowing all about the stuff, I honestly don't know enough about him to say. So, but there is the people will hear like a headline or something and just take that, oh, well, I heard he's, this or that or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be like a real lightning rod in the liberty movement. And I can see why, because a lot of people like look up to him. He talks about really personal stuff, really like sensitive topics, and they're really impactful for a lot of people. And so they get really emotionally wrapped up in the show and in stuff.
Well, there was that too, the, claiming that it's like a cult or something, and that people that used to be part of his inner circle came out and talked about that and this, I guess, defooing or whatever
there's some weird behavior that some of the people who love his show do, like to a certain extent. Sometimes people who really love Free Domain Radio will like stop talking to all their friends, but maybe they have reasons for that, right? Because their friends aren't on the same page with them. They don't want to be friends with people who aren't philosophically aligned. So it's like, I can see it from both sides. You know what I mean? It might look really weird to someone else, but they have the reasons for doing it. So I think there's a lot of great stuff in there. And especially during the time that I was most actively listening to it, I got a ton out of it. And so, I'll go ahead and say that I really appreciate that. And if there's some stuff lately that I disagree with more, I'm not going to harp on it too much, because I just don't want to get into.
Yeah, no, I understand.
I just don't want to get into.
I understand, but would you? Because you did, I believe, a few interviews with him, and one on Free Talk Live when you co-hosted that on Sundays. Would you do another interview with him, or have him on your show, or come on his show again, or is it kind of, are you to a point where?
Oh yeah, I think I would do that. Yeah, absolutely. I would talk to almost anyone, even somebody like if Alex Jones wanted me to be on his not that I'm comparing stuff to Alex Jones, but if Alex Jones wanted me to be on his show, I'd probably do it.
I felt special for a little while, but then you just killed that. So.
Well, you can get something out of talking to pretty much anyone. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, again, I know you have to go. I don't want to keep you from your dinner. I know it's 11:30 over there, so I really appreciate you coming on. And do you want to mention? I put all of your Facebook pages and your sites in the episode, so if people want to find those, but any of them that you want to mention? I know you're still doing Let's Talk Bitcoin currently.
Yeah, if you want to hear the podcast that I do, it's letstalkbitcoin.com. That's what comes out twice a week. And if you want to know more about my voiceover stuff, or if you want to work with me on a voice project, my website is smvoice.info.
And then occasionally, do you come on Brian's show, Sovereign Tech, or produce it, or just when
yes,
you're
I am.
home?
Thank you. I'm the
he's
Sovereign
doing
Tech producer, and I sometimes do appear on the show. So that would be sovereigntech.com, SOVRYN tech.com.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much again. I really appreciate it. And we'll definitely have to have you back on to do a show on Bitcoin, because it's really something that I've been wanting to talk about. I just, I know a little about it from Free Talk Live, but I'm way far from an expert. So it'd be great to have somebody like you come on to talk about that.
Yeah, right on, Dave. I appreciate that. And thanks so much for having me on your show. It's great to talk with you.
All right. Thanks again.
Take care.
So that was Stephanie Murphy. Again, check out her show, Let's Talk Bitcoin, on, she might have gave another website, but I have letstalkbitcoin.com. But I mean, you can search for it as well. She has various YouTube videos up there of interviews that she has done. All the Pork Therapy episodes, you can find all the podcasts on her website as well. Just search for Pork Therapy to find those. So we're going to take a quick break. We just went for about an hour and a half. So again, I appreciate Stephanie taking the time. I didn't want to take a break because I know she had to go, and I wanted to just get in as much as possible, because there's so much that I wanted to ask her. She has a lot going on and has accomplished a lot. And I do look at that, the same way when I had Mark Edge and Ian Freeman of Free Talk Live on, and how they built their show and how they accomplished that into a successful business, in the same way that Stephanie has accomplished her voiceover business. And really, I mean, taking a big risk there as well. And I think that's something that other people can see and, look at that as, hey, well, they can do something like that as well, and use that as an inspiration. So I like to highlight anybody that goes out there and accomplishes something like that, because it's definitely something that we can all look at to kind of strive for, in a sense, to have our own business, to take those risks, to be able to put something together. In this whole thing, you don't own your business, or somehow other people built your business or whatever, is a bunch of bullshit. Well, I guess especially if you're the only one doing it, in her case, where her business is her. But still, I mean, if she had some people working for her, like assistants or something like that, or maybe in the future she'll expand and have a group of voiceover people, and use her contacts to book those. I should have asked her about that, because that might be a good idea. I know she's only been doing it a couple of years, but maybe it's something she'll expand to in the future, and hopefully she continues her success with that. So we're going to take a quick break. A few things I want to talk about when we come back. One being this vaccine issue in California, where they want to pass laws to make them mandatory, as well as the lawsuit filed against the TSA after they held a man for 20 hours for making a complaint. If you'd like to call in, you can call into our new number, 702-470-7664. That's 702-470-7664. You can also Skype into the show, username Nonpartisan Liberty for All. And I'm like knocking over cans here. And we'll be right back after this. Nonpartisan Liberty for All Radio.